Hello everyone. This is Mercedes Toon from the partnership, and here is my colleague Jessica Merrill.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this courageous conversation with Maitri Bay Area. We're here to talk about cultural responsiveness. I just wanted to give a quick reminder to everyone that this is an interactive conversation, so I'd love for you to comment. I'll be throwing out some interesting topics to discuss in the comments, so definitely join in, and if you have questions, please ask them of the group. They'll be able to answer your questions. All right, let's get started.
Thank you, Jessica. So, in 2017, with the general support of Blue Shield of California Foundation, 11 organizations and the partnership participated in a learning community. The goal was to examine with an equity lens the policies, procedures, and outcomes, and we collectively share challenges, successes, and overall it opened the door to have these courageous conversations. And today we are here at Maitri, a really lovely agency, very important agency, and we know that culture is not neutral. And today we are having this conversation with Sakya and Nandini. And first of all, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself and your agency.
Should I?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mercedes and CPDB, for giving us this opportunity for having this courageous conversation. My name is Nandini Lee, and I manage Maitri Outreach and Prevention Program. And I joined Maitri in 2011. So through this program, we want to gain visibility for Maitri in our community, so that people know that there is an agency in the Bay Area that can provide free and confidential services to those who are facing domestic violence. And we collectively, our staff members and volunteers, we collectively speak almost all major South Asian languages, if not all, most of the major South Asian languages. We understand the cultural challenges, nuances our community face. So it's important for them to know that we exist in this county, in this country, in this state. And we also, through this program, outreach program, we for last couple of years, we are focusing on prevention by engaging our community. We are doing several activities, events with the men, our youth community members and children, so that we can put seed prevention in their mind, so that as a community, as a whole community, we can do something to prevent, to stop domestic violence before it happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandini.
Thank you, Mercedes. Lovely for you to come visit us here in San Jose, California. As you can see, we have lovely weather today.
Yeah.
My name is Aki Aafrin, and I have been a domestic violence advocate with Maitri for the past 11 years. Currently, I manage the client advocacy programs, which is a combination of our crisis helpline, our legal advocacy program, immigration assistance, and a robust peer counseling program. We recently started a mental health component to our agency, where we are able to provide one-on-one therapy and some support groups for our clients. So that's how we are rolling.
Thank you for telling us a little bit about yourself and what your agency does. And so I remember that during the sharing in our learning circle, you mentioned that participating in the cultural responsiveness reflections and work, you said it is an ongoing collective journey of looking inward and exploring outward. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
I can start that, yes, for last couple of years we have been consciously putting effort to be culturally responsive, but it's not that we didn't know about culturally responsiveness. When Maitri started in 1991, almost more than 27 years back, that was the reason Maitri was formed. So at that time, there was a need in our community for an agency where South Asian people, if they're facing domestic violence or if their loved one, family members, they're facing domestic violence, so they could call to an agency where they could speak in their own language. They could understand that, oh, these people, they know what I'm going through, the cultural challenges I'm going through. So 27 years back, that the seed was there, the cultural responsiveness, that we welcomed people and we talked to them in their language and their mother tongues. We told them that we understand your situation, the challenges you are going through, and and after 27 years, we are seeing the same thing. That people, many community members, they still feel comfortable when they're calling us. They feel comfortable talking in their own language, and when they talk about, maybe family violence or extended family members abuse, and then they know that we will understand. We will not question them. So right now we are doing more effort to be culturally responsiveness, to find out that whether we have any bias, whether what we are doing, is it culturally responsive enough. When we are mindfully incorporating cultural elements in our outreach, in our client services. For example, we have translated our brochure in Hindi, Urdu, and Nepali, because if some people, if they're not comfortable in English, they will be able to read our services in their own language. We have language flyers.
Yeah, and thank you for talking about that, because that reminds me of something that I have heard so many times, about the cultural group I belong to, the Latinos,
Yeah.
so a lot of times there is this myth about the Latinos being one monolithic group. And it doesn't matter if somebody is from Argentina or was born in the United States. It seems like everyone is put together in the same group. How is that in the Asian community?
So, you are correct. We are seen as one group, right? But in South Asia, if we look at it, there are 7 different countries, and there are all the major religions of the world that's present, all different forms of government that you can think of. There is a dictatorship, there is a religious government, there is democracy, right? All types of differences they have, and that actually inform what people's expectations are from a system, from an organization, from governments. And that's how early on we figured that this is a very diverse community, so we cannot really rely on one approach, right? Everything cannot fit in one box. If we talk about language, for example, like Nandini was mentioning, currently we have about 14 to 15 different language capacity within our volunteer pool. But in South Asia, there are many more languages. India itself, being the biggest country, has more than 21 official languages, right? So but when we look at the systems, we see that they don't have the capacity to actually serve all these small groups. So we are able to see a lot of gaps. And as an organization, that has always been our priority to provide some of these access within our organization when the domestic violence survivors need it. And that's how our approach is always informed, that we know we are a diverse group and we don't know everything about every single group. So we continue to learn. It's a learning process, just like culture in general is, right? It's like a flowing river. There are new things coming up. There are new experiences that people are going through. So we just have to keep up with the new.
So, so you are addressing another myth that happen a lot about ethnicities or different groups, which is that if you are this or that, if you belong to a determined group, you are an expert in everything related to that group. And so you just mentioned a couple of things about that.
Right. So Mercedes, we believe that each person is an expert in their own life, about their own life, right? So when we work with a client, we acknowledge immediately that we do not know everything about this person just by looking at this person, just by looking at her passport, where she's coming from, what religion she believes in, what language she speaks in. There is so much more to a human being in rather than their one singular identity, right? A person is made up with so many multiple identities. So the community is even more complex, right? So we don't know everything about everything, and we may actually know very little. I think the key is to understanding that humility, that we do not know enough, and starting from that we need to learn about this person, we need to learn about this community, and having these resources to know where to seek that information, beginning with that person, right? Yeah. Letting them decide how they would want to identify themselves, what is their personal culture, not just their national or religious or linguistic culture.
Yeah.
The assumption can be wrong. An assumption, if we assume something, assumption can be misleading and dangerous. Because if we want to put all South Asian in one box and we have an assumption, oh, their problems are same, they see domestic violence with the same lanes, that will be wrong. Every individual is different, and especially South Asians, when they are coming to this country from South Asia, they are coming from the land of diversity to the land of diversity. So they are already bringing their culture, and then when they are coming here, they want to assimilate with other people. They change. Culture can change, and based on the socio-political dynamic. So it is not that what and South Asian, probably Indian Hindu girl, the culture she has in India, when she comes here, she may not have the same culture with another South Asian Hindu girl who is born and raised here. So we have to take every individual as unique individual. Their problem is unique. They're reacting to their problem can be different. Two members from same group can have different culture, because culture is fluid.
So having said that, I just wanted to mention that yes, there is one thing about individual culture, of course, the culture of our community, and then the organizational culture, right? So with the CROS project, we were also able to look, when we said looking inward, we looked at what are our practices as an organization. Are we non-discriminatory to every single group that's coming to us, right? And do we have any implicit bias towards somebody or against somebody? How are we incorporating all these language access and cultural responsiveness that we are learning about into our organizational structure? So we had the opportunity to also look at those internal culture.
Yes. And that is sometimes it's very uncomfortable conversation. It is not that when we are trying to find out if we have any bias, implicit bias, then we started looking inward, and sometimes we felt uncomfortable. Because we are human being, it is possible that we have bias against any group or any community. But we are happy that this project has given us opportunity to find out our bias, to work on this, so that how can we eliminate that bias from our individual life as well as our organizational culture.
Yeah. So you are talking about very complex things. You are talking about many layers to look at when examining what the organization is doing. When we talk about implicit bias, seems like not an easy thing, and neither a joyful thing sometimes. Like looking inward and seeing who we are not serving, how the policies are working, how the procedures, what is the outcome. And Nandini, you just add to all that the culture is changing often. So there are not static things, there are not fixed things.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Satya, you also mentioned that it's necessary to be flexible. So to be flexible and to look at all those changes. So, and you both have talked about the complexity of the South Asian Pacific community, and you have mentioned how many languages are there, how important it is to approach people in their own language, and that can be very challenging. So how have you addressed that?
So Mercedes, there are federal regulations that people should be provided with language access when they are accessing any organization that is receiving federal funds, right? That we know that. Now that only applies to a certain types of organization. So let's say all the courts, the social services office, and nowadays also most of the healthcare facilities, they will provide language access. You can go there and ask for your language access. However, for most of the Asian languages, there is no measure to control the quality of interpretations, which we have experienced. And if you take out all these systems that are receiving federal funds, it's important to remember people's lives don't just end at a courthouse or at a social services office.
Right.
People go to every single place they need to for their living, for their children's well-being, for their entertainment. So as an agency, we try to fill that gap for our survivors. So when a survivor needs an interpreter to go to an attorney meeting, right, that is not going to be provided by federal funds. The attorney may not have or may not be willing to spend any money for a consultation for a client who doesn't speak English. So we started out doing those things for our survivors and giving them as much interpretation help as possible for our volunteers and staff members. And the other thing, so related to that, we are able to develop our own language bank. I think we talked about that at some point before.
Right.
So what we do in our language bank is our volunteers receive some kind of training on the rules of interpretation. They know what are the ethics, what are the professional codes, how interpretation should be, and what are the liabilities, right? Everything we try to educate and prepare our volunteers to be interpreters. And we see that what is the standard of an interpreter for interpretation, right? Many of us speak a second language, but that doesn't make one person an interpreter. Being an interpreter is a very difficult job.
It
so,
is.
so we see that when our volunteers, we give them like a screening test, okay? That test yourself if you can actually be an interpreter. And Mercedes, I kid you not, at least 40% of our volunteers say, I had no idea it's so difficult, I cannot be an interpreter, right? Now, so that's one thing about our language bank. So now what we started doing outside is kind of auditing when the court is giving interpreters for our clients. So our volunteer who is always going to court with survivors, we always have volunteers, they will see how the interpretation is going, and if it is not going well and the client actually is saying that she didn't really understand what the interpreter was talking about, then we make a point that we bring it back to the authorities and say, hey, this interpreter didn't really do a good job. So we started doing that regularly, giving feedback about interpreters and bringing some attention to the matter that for most of the Asian languages that are not spoken by a majority group, there is no formal process. Who can be an interpreter? What is the education that an interpreter must have? What are the rules of interpretation, right? So we're trying to work with those things right now.
Thank you, Zaki. We are at Maitri talking with Zakia and Nandini about cultural responsiveness. And it's so interesting what you are saying about interpretation, because as you mentioned before, the funds, either federal funds or state funds, are very limited. And there are many agencies that struggle with figuring out how to support the clients without necessary interpretation or translation. And so that is a wonderful idea to train volunteers and to have a language bank available, which takes a lot of energy and effort and coordination.
Yes.
But given the high diversity in our state, it seems like it's something necessary.
Yes, it is absolutely necessary.
It is very important, because if you don't get, if our clients, they don't know what is going on, they don't know the full picture due to language issues, then they will not get the full support from the system. So that's why when we do cultural responsiveness training for mainstream service providers, for example, law enforcement officers, we tell them that do not use family members or friends for interpretation. Ask for official so that you can interpretation, so that you can get unbiased version of the. Because we have had clients who in past where police officers, they asked interpretation from language help from the landlord, and without knowing that the landlord is actually the abuser's best friend, and that he was not sharing the real story with police officers, and at the same time in their own language he was telling the survivor, the victim, that what are you doing? Are you they will arrest your husband and you will be on the street. So she was already traumatized and now under a lot of pressure. So that's why it's not like sometimes people assume that friends or family members, they will give you right interpretation, language interpretation, but you don't know the whole story. So it's always better to depend on the official, like 911, 211 language bank, or find out if any staff members in that in their group can speak that language. So language is very important. Interpretation is very important.
It is. And so thank you for sharing all that. And I would like to go back for a moment to the inward. So you have talked about how this journey reviewing the policies and procedures and the outreach and the structure of Maitri led you to make some change. So what are the most important changes that you have made lately?
So I wouldn't call it a change as such, but it's a practice that we started adopting, that we have a regular volunteer meeting, and we started bringing up issues that many of us may not have been comfortable with in the past, but that exists in our community, right?
Like for example?
For example, the LGBTQ issue is a very debated issue. I think just as in the United States, back in South Asia, it's not everybody is not on the same page. So we started having those conversations. Why, for a domestic violence advocate, it's really important to understand the complexities of that and how to adapt with the changing circumstances, how to answer when an LGBTQ person is calling our crisis line, right? And looking, we talked about the biases, right? If we have any biases, understanding what is the bias. Is it a religious bias? Is it sexual orientation based bias? So we did start bringing up these difficult conversations into our meeting spaces.
And what has been the response from the volunteers, or because in some way these are, like you mentioned, new conversations. How have you navigated resistance, challenges, etc.?
So I mean, we are very clear that at the organization level there is a no discrimination policy. So there is no doubt about that. Now we are looking more into people's personal preferences, right? So it's not about whether our organization will be supporting this or not. There is no question about that because we are a non-discriminatory space. It's more about helping folks ask those questions of themselves, and if they have any doubts, what resources as staff members, as the leadership of the organization, we can provide someone to figure out how they would like to work with that situation, right?
We have brought speakers from outside so that they can educate us about these issues, the challenges we are going through, and to make us understand better, for example, LGBTQ issues. So we invited a speaker from a South Asian LGBTQ group. And when she came and we asked question what we are not aware before, like it was open for all volunteers and staff members. So it was a quite learning journey for us. But I would say it's a very educational and informative. And we also, even at our staff meeting, at our staff lunch, when we eat lunch, we sometimes share cultural stories and cultural challenges, nuances to understand. Maybe Zakia and I, we speak same language. We are from South Asian country, but we may share some commonalities, but there are so many differences between her and me. So we learn from each other. So that if we see some community members or some clients from my community or her community, so that we can be respectful. If we know the cultural challenges, nuances I am going through or she is going through, it is not that only one person can talk about the whole culture, and it's a continuous learning process. It's not that I'm just only learning about Bangladeshi culture from Zakia. Maybe I am talking to other people as well, but it's a continuously accumulating and collecting information, and that we believe will help us in our journey.
Yeah, particularly in this moment where we can observe so much polarization about everything almost. It is so refreshing to hear the way that Maitri is approaching the new things, like you said, Zakia, where it is a principle, it is a value, non-discrimination.
Yes.
However, having just the intention, as we know, is not enough. So in every step, we start like uncovering some little biases or big biases. And so I really like how you both have described that you are holding in one hand that principle, and in the other you are being clear, transparent, and compassionate about the personal issues. And so examining that, but in the light of that principle that I would say is the light of equity, is what really can help us to move forward.
Absolutely,
Absolutely.
agree with you. Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your experience. And we have a couple more minutes, like 1 minute more.
So now we can ask you a question, Mercedes.
Oh, please.
So, can you tell us one or two things that you like most about the CROS project? What are those things that you are really very excited about in this project?
The first thing I really like about the project is that puts in the front the knowledge that culture is not neutral and that there are power differences,
Mm-hmm.
and that we can look at that and be open, be transparent, and really work towards the world we really want, a world where everyone is respected, is valued, and have access, not only to the basic things, but to everything that can make our life beautiful. And I really believe that CROS gives the opportunity not only at an organizational level, but also promote reflection at an individual level.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And there are so many thoughts and theories that favor one thing over the other, like self-transformation, organizational transformation, and I think both are necessary, that we need to do both things at the same time. We need to do that self-reflection that you here at Maitri have been doing so well, and the organizational introspection too, and the change, and bringing everything together, creating the beloved community. So that is what I love about this project, and the opportunity
Of
to
course.
be with people like you.
Yes.
I love it.
Yeah. So the peer learning
Lovely.
circle, we really enjoyed that because it was a great platform for us to exchange, knowledge, best practices, and information. So this project that gave us this opportunity to be part of that peer learning circle.
I'm so
Thank you.
glad to hear that, and thank you very much,
Thank
both
you.
of you
Thank you.
and Maitri, and thank you everyone.